Hi, everyone. I'm Jane, and I'm the creator of the Adult Learning Hub. I love having interesting conversations with adult educators around the world, talking about the things that are important to them. I like to feature those who are making a measurable impact in adult education and offer exciting and what I feel are really exclusive insights for practitioners to better their practice, to more confidently navigate our ever-changing world of work, to feel energized, and to ultimately improve outcomes for their learners. And I'm so pleased to introduce our guest today and Adult Learning Hub member, Martine Ellis. Martine leads professional development and teacher education at the Guernsey Institute. She writes and she speaks about well-being driven productivity, professional learning, and personal knowledge management. When she's not teaching or writing, Martine can usually be found chasing her mischievous dog in one of Guernsey's beautiful beaches. And I'm so excited to sit down with her today. Welcome, Martine.
Hi, Jane. It's really good to be here. And I'm so glad I mentioned my dog in my little bio that you read there, because if she barks, we're just keeping it real today, aren't we? This is real life conversation.
Absolutely. It's all about, actually, in the Adult Learning Hub, it is all about authenticity. So we just embrace that today.
Absolutely. Really, really nice to be here. Good to be chatting with you.
Yeah, it's so nice to chat today. So I always think it's nice in these kind of interviews just to hear someone's story. So I'm quite curious to know how you got your start in teacher training, adult learning. What is your story? Tell me about Martine.
That's such a good question. So I guess in a way, I came to teaching quite late in my career. I don't know, I was about 30. Prior to that, I had a career in the finance sector. So to give you a bit of context and a bit of background, I'm in Guernsey and the Channel Islands, and one of our sort of biggest industries over here is finance. So to be working in the finance sector is quite normal in Guernsey. And I'd done really well in my finance career. I'd got to the point where I was in my late 20s and I was a director of a trust company. I had a really nice car and a great salary.
Sounds like the life.
Absolutely. On the outside, it looked like I was, hashtag living my best life, shall we say. But I had that kind of, maybe it was an approaching 30 thing. And I just kind of sat there and went, what am I doing? Who am I helping? And in a way, I felt like I've heard the phrase golden handcuffs before. I kind of was golden handcuffed to my role because I thought, I've got a mortgage to pay, I've got a lifestyle I really enjoy, I don't want to get rid of my convertible. But when it comes down to it, who am I helping in my job? And that's obviously no disrespect to anyone who works or trains in finance, but it wasn't for me. And kind of a whole bunch of really weird things happened around that time. And I don't really believe in fate or anything like that. But clearly the universe was trying to tell me something, because a couple of things happened. Specifically, this is going to sound really random, but I was on Facebook and a friend had posted one of those chain letter type questionnaire things and one of the questions was, if you could have any job in the world, what would it be? And I obviously wasn't very busy at work that day because I filled it out and teacher, didn't give it a second thought. Just, that's what I always should have been. And this friend who posted it came back and said, well, why not? And I was like, that's a good point. Around that time, my local further education college was advertising for a one-year maternity cover, teaching office administration. Now, I wasn't an office administrator, I was a director of a trust company, but, I was pretty good at admin. And basically, when I was off travelling, my administration team ran the company. So I knew it was an important thing. And I just thought, why not? This is kind of fate. And the person in the advert, I knew them because it's Guernsey, we're very small. So long story short, I took a bit of a gamble and I applied for the job and I got it. And it really was a gamble because that was a 1-year contract, massive pay cut. I got the job and I never left. That was coming up to 14 years ago, giving away my age now. I'm coming up to my 14th year at what was then called the Guernsey College of Further Education, but we're now called the Guernsey Institute. So I started on a 1-year contract, lecturer in office admin. Then I moved into a role that was kind of professional development-ish, focused on education technology. And then I ended up teaching initial teacher training, and now I'm head of professional development.
Fantastic.
So, yeah,
What
haven't
a
looked back.
journey.
Best thing I ever did.
I love that. And I find it's interesting, people who work with sort of adult learners or in the adult education field, we sometimes stumble into it or we're called into it, I think. And when you're asking yourself, who am I helping? I think that's such an important question to ask. And I'm sure many people maybe who are considering a career change might be asking themselves the same question. But you work on Guernsey. Tell me a bit about Guernsey, the context in which you work for our kind of international audience. I want to hear a bit more about this special place.
It is kind of special, actually. And I'm used to having to explain where it is for just in case anyone doesn't know. You've got the UK, you've got France. We're a bit in between the two, in the middle of the channel. So yeah, Guernsey, it's a very small island, about 64,000 people population. We are the only further education college there, which brings with it kind of interesting challenges. Certainly that there are challenges there personally from a career development perspective, which we might touch on later. But also any young person or adult who wants to do FE and some HE on island, they come to us. So my organisation offers the full range of FE and some HE provision. As I mentioned earlier, my start was teaching 16 to 19, but now I'm 100% focused on teaching adults. And actually that's right for me. People listening or watching may have heard of Guernsey through the fairly recent film, The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, or the book. People now know where Guernsey is because of that. But yeah, we're quite finance heavy in terms of industry and things like that. Many moons ago, horticulture would have been a massive industry for the island, but these days, lots of tech, lots of I guess we've got quite a few media firms and things like that, but finance heavy in terms of industries.
Interesting. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to sit down with you today is that you had spearheaded a kind of initiative called The One Thing at the Guernsey Institute. And I am so curious about the one thing. How did it become a thing?
Yeah, it became one big thing in a way, I guess.
It sounds it.
We have so many kind of one thing related puns now. It's hilarious. I'll give you a bit of
magic.
Yeah, absolutely. To give you a bit of background, it was about 4 years ago that we made a big shift in our approach to professional development of teachers or lecturers, whatever you want to call them. All of the research around graded lesson observations was pointing to the fact that they really weren't worth the paper they were written on. And this is not just in FE, but obviously I was focusing on the FE research. So most organisations at that time were using graded lesson obs and saying that they were for professional development. But actually, really what they were was part of performance management. Now, I don't have a problem with performance management at all, but the problem with graded lesson observations was that they're an inaccurate snapshot of practice. Somebody who's probably hasn't been teaching for a while, potentially, comes in your classroom, has a look round, doesn't really know any of the context, nothing about your learners, and makes a judgment on what they see in that 1 hour slot. So that's not great from a quality measurement perspective. You can't really measure the quality of teaching and learning in that snapshot. It's really not good professional development. I have never learnt anything from somebody coming into my lesson and observing me putting on my best show because it's graded. That's what you do. You put on a performance for someone coming in to judge your practice, ultimately. So they were very much a flawed concept, the idea of you as a teacher or a lecturer or a trainer having someone observe you and judge your practice. There's very little good stuff that comes out of that in that judgmental capacity. Peer observations, totally different. That's not what we're talking about here. So all of the research and our own experience pointed to the fact that, they weren't great, so why were we doing them? So what we decided to do as an organisation is ditch graded lesson observations and replace them with a brand new approach to professional development, which might or might not include observations of a kind. And what we came up with was a concept called the one thing. and I'm very proud to have named it, because that's that's really stuck. The name, for some reason, just really stuck. You can walk down the corridor and say to somebody, "What's your one thing?" and they know what you mean.
I love that.
Yeah,
It's
I think
like, a catchphrase that anyone can use.
It was luck, really, but it has stuck. So what it means is that at the end of the academic year, you as a lecturer or a trainer reflect on your practice over the course of the year. What went well, is there anything that came up that you feel you want to look at, develop? Just really reflect on your practice. And supported by a member of my team, you, the teacher, come up with one area of your professional practice that you want to develop in the year to come. So that's your one thing. And that one thing has to be very much rooted in pedagogy. It's not, I don't know, I want to improve my time management. It's got to be about teaching and learning, very much rooted in student outcomes. I don't mean from a measurable perspective, I mean that's the rationale behind it. So you choose your one thing, and you are supported by a member of my team who helps you kind of scale that appropriately, because invariably someone chooses something huge, that people tend to go huge first. But actually the idea of the one thing is it is one micro thing that you can really zone in on and improve and develop and research and test stuff out in relation to.
And I like that it sounds like they have the support of their superior to really zone in, to hone in on that one thing.
Well, more importantly, it's a peer rather than a superior. So my team...
Even better.
Yeah, my team are a group of advanced practitioners. They've had to interview and go through a recruitment process to be part of my team. So they demonstrate that they are real leaders in teaching and learning. But I haven't got any middle leaders in this particular... I'm a middle leader. I don't have any middle leaders in my team. They are all teaching full-time tables. So they are experts, but they're not there to be mentors. If anything, they're in a coaching role. Yeah. But it's important to me that they are kind of on the cutting edge of teaching and learning. They know what's current, so they can adopt more of an instructional coaching type approach if needed.
So it sounds like it's more of a partnership.
100%.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's no judgment involved at all. It is two teachers, two trainers working together, one in a coaching role, one being coached effectively, to develop their practice. So the teacher has chosen their one thing. They get together with their advanced practitioner to chat it through, to work on the scale, to make a plan for the year. And then the teacher starts researching their one thing. So they might read, they might do some professional development, they might join the hub, to talk to people further afield about the topic. In that first term, they're planning, they're thinking, they're researching. Then in the second term, they have the opportunity to work really closely with their advanced practitioner. So this window of time back in the day would have been the observation window, but it's not that anymore. They complete a one thing activity. And what that means is they meet with their advanced practitioner and the teacher decides whether they want the advanced practitioner to come into their session and see them doing their one thing, or whether they want to do something like a professional discussion or a materials review. They can do something academic, journal related, writing something, a reflective something or other. Their one thing activity can be anything, as long as it's kind of a pivotal point in the process, supported by the advanced practitioner. And it's all about seeing how they've come from their initial research to where they are in their learning environment. They might be experimenting with something, testing stuff out. Any way the AP can help the teacher kind of initiates that. The teacher chooses what they do, how they get helped. It's very much led by the individual, which is one of the reasons why we've had such good buy-in. So then that happens, supported by the AP, and then the third term of the academic year is focused on evaluating the impact of that person's one thing, looking back, reflecting, thinking, okay, did it all work out how I thought it would? What was the impact on my students? We're not talking about this in a kind of Ofstedy kind of way. It's actually because there's no pressure for their one thing to be a success. I mean, arguably, what is a success? If they try something and it doesn't work, that's also a success, in a different kind of way. Yeah. So they look back, reflect on what happened with their AP, and then they share practice with the rest of the college.
Excellent.
So they're sharing, what happened and how it went. And the way we normally do that is through an inset day at the end of the year. So we have a full day, a celebration of practice for the one thing. So things like sort of just like speed dating type discussion activities. People are sharing, because we're split over a couple of campuses, so we don't see colleagues all the time. Like a marketplace and some workshops and just everything to inspire the next year's one thing.
Excellent.
Which they then choose on that day.
Yeah, fantastic. There's a number of things you mentioned in there that I really liked around, being really practitioner led, almost encouraging them to be self-directed in their own development, but they have a guide, they have a advanced practitioner who they can work with, who kind of helps them hone in on that one thing. And I think it also increases agency as well, it seems, for the educator, really taking ownership over their professional development.
Well, all of the research suggests that that's how you're going to get good professional development happening. If you're treating teachers and trainers like the professionals they are, the research indicates that we know where we need to develop, which is why that judgmental grading stuff isn't necessary. Just create an environment where individuals can reflect, identify what they want to work on, supported as needed, and then they can make it happen.
Yeah, excellent. I love that. So in the context that our practitioners work in, adult educators, some of them work in academic institutions, others work in corporate environments, for small startups or in community organizations. We can find adult educators everywhere. Now, in your context, when you were trying to introduce this one thing, this new initiative for teacher development, how did you get buy-in? Because I think this is one thing that we're sometimes asking ourselves, as educators, is how you can get buy-in from your kind of internal stakeholders to really start a new project or to engage in this kind of activity. How did you get buy-in? It seems like it was easy, but I'm curious to know, what was your thinking around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And actually, we did get buy-in fairly quickly from most people. And I think some of the reasons for that were around clear communication. We kind of had a bit of a marketing plan. Have some marketing experience, but not much. But things like naming it something that was quite sticky.
Yes.
Really clearly communicating the reasons for doing it, and there are no bad reasons for it. There's no judgment, there's no observation to see how good you are as a teacher, there's no, we were getting rid of something that didn't work and introducing something that was evidence informed. So we said the dog would make an appearance. She's just going to meet the cat. Absolutely, it is, Penny, the one thing is very exciting.
Love it.
She's gone now. So yeah, we did market it really carefully. The great thing about it is that for each individual person doing it, one person's one thing is very different to another. So if I was working with somebody who perhaps was a bit reticent about the one thing and was a bit like, you know what, I'd rather just have a graded lesson observation, I don't like change, got a bit of that. I would encourage them to really focus on a very small one thing that could have a really good, big impact on their students. And that's how I would get buy-in from people who were a bit unsure about it, because it's completely personalised. They are 100% in control of what their one thing is. I'm not telling them. And that's sometimes a bit of a shock to the system as well, the idea that you can choose. So yeah, I think making sure the one thing is right for the person helped with buy-in from those who were a bit unsure. That was year one. Year two, I can honestly say, maybe with the exception of one person, given that we've got, how many lecturers? About 80 lecturers that this covers. 1-2 people needed a bit more hand-holding. Year three, no probs.
Excellent. It's like you've come kind of full circle now.
Yeah, feels like it. It's good.
And what results have your teachers experienced? Is there an example of a practitioner that stands out in your mind? I'd be so curious to know.
Yeah, there are lots, to be fair. And actually, this quite recently we've recorded some video case studies, so I'll see if I can share those with you at a later date, because they're really, really interesting to see, because it really makes it real. The ones who stand out in my mind actually are the ones who were a bit reticent initially. Because, you know, it's distance travelled, isn't it? They were like, yeah, no, don't fancy it. And I've got one in my mind. I won't mention any names, obviously, but he's an engineering lecturer. So, no, I beg your pardon, not engineering, electrical lecturer. Right. I don't think he'll be watching this. And he teaches apprentices, so works with adults. And yeah, he was a bit unsure about it and was a bit like, I don't know, you know, maybe I could do something about, I've got this one student who's really struggling with this practical thing that he has to do. Well, I'm not sure. Anyway, I had a bit of a chat with him, and then I went and see him a couple of weeks later, and he had gone into the staff room where we have a professional development library, just a curated selection of sort of books for colleagues, sort of teacher training type books. Picked up one of the books. It was one of the walkthrough books by Tom Sherrington and Oliver Caviglioli, which I really recommend. It was the first one. Picked up a walkthrough book, which has loads of teaching strategies in it. Had a read, picked a strategy that he thought might work, decided he was going to test that out. And then I went in for my initial meeting with him, and he said, well, I've read this, and I think this is what I'm going to try. And it was all around sort of repetition and scaffolding, and sort of scaffolding the task, and then kind of reducing the scaffolding and repeating and building muscle memory and stuff like that. Was a practical thing. And he just told me what he was going to do, the reasons for doing it, who he was going to focus on, and I was just like, yeah. That's a cracking one thing. It's small, but potentially has huge impact for one learner. If it works with them, you roll it out to others. And it, you know, this was not a groundbreaking thing, but it was the fact that he wasn't sure, and then all of a sudden he was incredibly invested in it, tried it out, tested it, it worked, shared it with his closest colleague, then he had a go. And just that kind of ripple effect of trying new things based on books or, you know, research or whatever, and it working, and you learning from it and reflecting on it. Oh, it's just great. I love that. I mean, that's kind of nuts to pick such a kind of small, but it was who he was and the fact that he wasn't sure about it.
And he seemed quite skeptical about it initially. Yeah. But he just seemed to take that risk and put himself out there and try that one thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of, that embodies the whole concept of it for me. It's not, I mean, don't get me wrong, we've had people who have had significantly bigger one things, who have had massive positive results. A colleague springs to mind who was experimenting with spaced repetition. So the app Anki Notes, she experimented with that, and she's got a very kind of scientific brain. So she did a proper study, you know, with control groups and things like that on the benefit of using this app. And so it was really, really good. And she got some fantastic results as well. So they're kind of two ends of the spectrum, but equally brilliant as a one thing.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned, obviously, this one gentleman who perhaps was skeptical, but he ended up, it sounds like he sort of transformed his practice in a way, and in his own professional development.
Yeah.
And I'm curious or interested to know is if you had any challenges that you came up against where perhaps the one thing didn't resonate with any of your practitioners.
I think really because we very carefully explained it and sold it, and it was a sell, you know, it really was a sell to colleagues. The only challenges we've come up against are with, for example, colleagues who work part-time, because invariably our colleagues who work part-time are squeezing in a lot of work into a very short space of time that, you know, they all work so incredibly hard. They felt a little bit strapped for time to focus on their one thing. So that's been a bit of a challenge. But of course, the one thing is individual to them, so we make sure we help them scale it to a manageable size. And it's just one thing, without meaning to point out the obvious.
Exactly.
You know, my rationale for it being just one thing is the idea that if you improve one aspect of your practice, other things start kind of organically falling into place behind. I can't prove that yet, but I have a suspicion.
And it sounds manageable. It sounds sort of micro, in that they can really zone in on what's important to them.
Yeah.
What is it that they want to improve?
Exactly. And in some respects, the more micro, the better, because other stuff then grows out of it.
Absolutely. So, as a practitioner in your role, spearheading this really exciting initiative, I can only imagine the things that you've learned as a result. Tell me just some of your key learnings, key insights that you've taken away from this project.
I mean, looking at outside of the fact that I also have a one thing every year.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, my team, I've got 8 advanced practitioners this year, and me as well. So I'm the advanced practitioner to the advanced practitioner team. They all have one things as well. So, because it's very much, we're doing it alongside our peers. To make sure that hierarchy doesn't start establishing itself.
Right,
so aside from all the stuff that I've learned through my own one things, I think the biggest thing for me has been the power of practitioners identifying where they need to develop, owning their professional development, and being given that kind of professional trust to crack on and have a go, and to we create a very safe environment where they can make mistakes, and that's good because we learn from them. That process of you mentioned agency, giving people agency or helping them create agency, trusting, giving them space and time, just that process, that has been probably the biggest takeaway for me. The fact that my colleagues are amazing. They're absolutely incredible professionals who, when they're treated in the right way, will be absolutely the best possible practitioners they can be. But as leaders and managers, we have to create an environment for that to happen.
Absolutely. And just as a side note, how do you create that environment for these types of initiatives to be rolled out, or even just, in the small ways? How can you create kind of this atmosphere of trust?
I think removing any form of grading of practice was the starting point, because you're kind of saying to your teaching staff, we employed you because you're a professional individual who has experience and you're very good at your job. So that's where your starting point is. So removing grading was really, really important. Creating a support structure for colleagues that they could use as much or as little as they needed. So the AP team is there, and they have all been trained with coaching skills. So they're all sort of trained coaches. So that is a really strong support network for them. Creating support at sort of middle leadership level was essential as well. So that's something we didn't get right for the first couple of years. We didn't pay enough attention to the need for middle managers to be they have their own one things too, if they're like an academic middle manager, but for them to be regularly checking in with their staff saying, how's it going? What are you doing? How are your students finding that thing that you've been trying? So that kind of buy-in as well. So that's important. We have a protected professional development slot, which is an hour a week for the organisation. So I put on a lot of stuff in that hour, but if people aren't coming along to stuff that I'm putting on, they can work on their one thing. So at the very least, they've got an hour a week to work on it.
Right.
It doesn't always work that way. We know what teaching workloads are like. But and those sort of things just started creating that professional trust.
And I think if anything, also the pandemic has taught us, probably it's those relationships that were probably formed early in this one thing, that those can be sustained throughout difficult times, in that it's a way of collaborating with each other on a regular basis, maintaining that trust, and those professional relationships. Have they managed to maintain their one thing during COVID?
That's a really good question. So year 2 of the one thing, if I'm getting my numbers right, maths isn't my strong point, was challenging, and not everybody made the progress that they wanted to. But this year just gone, year 3, they managed it. They managed it because we adjusted expectations where we needed to. It comes down to this personalized thing again, because there's not a set of standards that we're measuring people against. Right. So, if somebody, for whatever reason, say a COVID-related reason, is struggling to do what they initially set out to do, we make some adjustments to ensure that it fits them. It's how we treat our learners, reasonable adjustments given situations. And you know, my AP team are trained to support that sort of situation, and they know what the aims and the expected outcomes of the one thing are. And so they work with the individual to make that happen. So
Right. So I think this gets us also to ask kind of the wider questions of, you know, what do your findings from this initiative, what do they tell us about professional development for educators of adults? You know, what principles should we be applying in today's day and age?
Yeah.
You know, of course, you know, you've come away with some very important learnings from this project, but wider speaking, what does this tell us about professional development for adult educators?
I think the biggest thing is it tells us the research that's out there is right. You know, professional teachers and trainers are professionals. Therefore, they have got a good sense of what they need to work on, what they should be working on. There's a hunger for research, experimentation. You know, it's really reinforced that message. I think on the flip side of that, the other message that's being reinforced for me is that can only happen when these professionals are given time and space to do this. So often in the work that we do, we're always going to be putting our learners first, right? That's the nature of what we do. However, in order to be functioning at your highest level, and this kind of links into my well-being driven productivity stuff as well, you need to get yourself in a good place. You need to be top of your game. And so you are going to turn up for your students and do the best possible thing if you invest a bit of that precious time in your development as well. That kind of balancing act is really interesting. And I think a lot of that starts with leadership and needs to be filtered down, in my opinion. So time and space, space, professional trust, and, you know, supporting staff to get excited as learners in their own right.
Absolutely. Now, at the end of my interviews, I always ask my interviewees, what are the three things, not one thing, not one thing, but what are the three things you know to be true about learning in adulthood?
I think I'll answer this from the point of view of a learner, because I'm currently on my final year of a master's in education.
That's right.
And, you know, full disclosure, I've not thought about this at all. So the three things,
in the spirit of authenticity.
Yeah, exactly. The three things I know to be true is that it is really hard work. Certainly studying at this high level, it's tough, it's challenging, but it is making me a more sympathetic teacher to my adult learners, because I know, you know, I'm in their shoes. I have to make time to study, and when I really don't fancy doing it. So it's certainly making me way more sympathetic to all of the adults that I teach. And I would also say that the experience I've had of doing my master's has made me realise that I am obsessed with learning, and that's an amazing trait for a trainee teacher. Now, I teach trainee teachers, that's the teaching part of my job. So if I can impart one thing to them, it's to help them develop an obsession with learning as well. Did I answer that in three? Maybe it was one thing.
I think you did. I love that. Thank you so much, Martine, for sharing your insights with us today. And other than in the Adult Learning Hub, where can people find you? How can they get in touch with you if they want to hear more about you, your work, and what you do?
Oh, thanks for asking. I think the easiest thing is for people to hop over to martineellis.com, because that's got all of my writing and other bits and bobs. Social media wise, the place I'm most active is Twitter. So I'm on there as Martine Guernsey. So I'm always up for a bit of a chat on Twitter with anybody. It's good fun.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. And I look forward to seeing you in the Hub. And if anyone is interested who is watching, who wants to join the Adult Learning Hub as a member, and they want to meet people like Martine who want to grow their practice and connect with other practitioners around the world, we are thriving in a new world of work together. So please join us. You can go to the adultlearninghub.com. Thanks, Martine, again.
My pleasure. Lovely to chat.
You too. Bye.